In March of 1983, a small farming community in rural Alabama became the center of one of the most bewildering financial mysteries in the state's history. What started as a routine banking day would spiral into a decades-long puzzle that left investigators baffled, a family destroyed, and $6.2 million completely vanished without a trace. For 37 years, this case remained dormant, filed away in dusty archives while theories swirled through coffee shops and church gatherings across 3 counties. Law enforcement had exhausted every lead. Federal agents had packed up their evidence boxes, and the community had reluctantly accepted that some secrets would never surface. But sometimes, the most extraordinary discoveries happen when you least expect them. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What I'm about to tell you involves a web of deception so intricate that it took nearly 4 decades to unravel. This isn't just about missing money. It's about trust, betrayal, and the shocking revelation that would finally emerge from the most unlikely of places. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a simple barn repair in 2020 would crack open a case that had stumped investigators for generations. The story begins with Harold Pemberton, a 64-year-old grain farmer who owned approximately 800 acres of fertile farmland in Cullman County, Alabama. Harold had worked this land for over 3 decades, building a modest but successful operation that supplied corn and soybeans to regional distributors. He was known throughout the area as a methodical man who kept detailed records and maintained strong relationships with his buyers. Harold lived alone in a weathered farmhouse that had belonged to his father before him. He had never married, dedicating his entire adult life to expanding and improving the family property. Neighbors described him as reserved but reliable, someone who paid his bills on time and helped others during difficult seasons. His routine was predictable. He rose before dawn, tended to his crops, handled business matters in the afternoon, and spent evenings reviewing financial documents at his kitchen table. In early 1983, Harold's agricultural operation was experiencing its most profitable period. A combination of favorable weather conditions and strong commodity prices had generated exceptional income. According to bank records, Harold's various accounts contained approximately $6.4 million, an extraordinary sum for a single farmer in rural Alabama during that era. This wealth had accumulated over several years of consecutive successful harvests, combined with Harold's frugal lifestyle and strategic land acquisitions. Harold conducted most of his banking through Cullman County First National, a community institution where he had maintained accounts since the 1950s. The bank's president, Margaret Donnelly, knew Harold personally and had overseen his financial growth throughout the years. Margaret often remarked to colleagues that Harold represented the ideal of American agricultural success, a man who had built substantial wealth through hard work and careful planning. On March 14, 1983, Harold arrived at Cullman County First National just after opening time. Bank employees later recalled that his demeanor appeared normal, perhaps slightly more serious than usual, but nothing that raised immediate concern. Harold requested to speak privately with Margaret Donnelly regarding what he described as an urgent financial matter. Margaret cleared her schedule and met with Harold in her office for approximately 45 minutes. During this meeting, Harold informed Margaret that he needed to liquidate the majority of his accounts immediately. He explained that a unique investment opportunity had presented itself, one that required rapid access to liquid capital. Harold provided few specific details about this opportunity, stating only that it involved agricultural futures and required absolute discretion. Margaret found the request unusual but not unprecedented. Wealthy farmers occasionally moved large sums for time-sensitive investments. Harold requested that the funds be converted to cashier's checks and bearer bonds, financial instruments that could be easily transported and quickly converted. Margaret processed the transaction, though she later admitted to investigators that Harold's urgency had made her slightly uncomfortable. The total amount withdrawn was $6.2 million, leaving only modest balances in Harold's remaining accounts. Bank security cameras recorded Harold leaving the building at approximately 11:30 that morning, carrying a leather briefcase and a canvas bank bag. Multiple witnesses observed him placing these items in the cab of his pickup truck before driving toward his farm. This was the last confirmed sighting of Harold Pemberton and the $6.2 million. Harold's absence wasn't immediately noticed. As a solitary man who often spent days focused on farm work without contacting others, his lack of communication initially raised no alarms. However, when Harold failed to appear for a scheduled meeting with grain buyers on March 18th, concerned business associates contacted the Cullman County Sheriff's Office. Deputies arrived at Harold's farm on the evening of March 18th to conduct a welfare check. They found the farmhouse unlocked, with Harold's truck parked in its usual spot near the barn. Inside the house, everything appeared normal. Harold's bed had been slept in recently, dishes sat clean in the kitchen, and his financial records remained organized on the kitchen table. However, Harold himself was nowhere to be found. The investigation began immediately. Detective Raymond Walsh, a 20-year veteran of the sheriff's office, was assigned as lead investigator. Walsh's initial assessment suggested that Harold had left voluntarily, possibly to pursue the investment opportunity he had mentioned to Margaret Donnelly. The absence of signs of struggle, the normal condition of the property, and Harold's recent large withdrawal supported this theory. However, as days passed without any communication from Harold, the investigation intensified. Detective Walsh expanded the search to include neighboring counties and requested assistance from state authorities. Harold's bank accounts showed no additional activity after March 14th. His Social Security number generated no hits in employment or housing databases. Credit checks revealed no new applications or activity. Harold Pemberton had effectively vanished. Federal investigators joined the case in early April, when the large sum of missing money triggered banking regulations requiring federal oversight. FBI Special Agent Linda Morrison took charge of the expanded investigation. Agent Morrison's team conducted extensive interviews with Harold's business associates, bank employees, and community members. They examined Harold's financial records, telephone communications, and travel patterns in the months preceding his disappearance. The investigation revealed several puzzling elements. Harold had made no unusual purchases or preparations that would suggest planned travel. His farming equipment remained properly maintained and stored. Seasonal supplies had been ordered for spring planting. Most significantly, Harold had scheduled multiple business meetings and contracted work that extended well beyond March 14th. These facts contradicted the theory that Harold had planned his departure in advance. Agent Morrison's team also discovered that Harold had received several telephone calls in the weeks before his disappearance from numbers that could not be traced. Phone company records showed calls originating from various payphones throughout Alabama and neighboring states. The pattern suggested deliberate attempts to avoid identification. Harold's neighbors recalled seeing unfamiliar vehicles parked along the rural roads near his property during this same period. The investigation expanded to examine Harold's background for potential connections to criminal organizations or illegal activities. However, extensive research revealed no evidence of involvement in anything beyond legitimate agricultural business. Harold's tax records were meticulously maintained, his business practices were transparent, and his reputation in the community was spotless. As weeks turned to months, the case grew cold despite intensive federal attention. The $6.2 million had seemingly evaporated, along with Harold Pemberton. Agent Morrison's team pursued hundreds of leads across multiple states, but none produced substantial evidence about Harold's whereabouts or the fate of the missing money. The investigation took on multiple dimensions as federal agents explored every conceivable angle. Agent Morrison established a dedicated task force that included financial crimes specialists, forensic accountants, and behavioral analysts. They theorized that Harold might have been coerced into withdrawing the funds, possibly through threats against his property or personal safety. The mysterious phone calls and unfamiliar vehicles suggested external pressure, but without additional evidence, these remained only theories. By summer 1983, the case had attracted regional media attention. Newspapers across Alabama ran stories about the vanished farmer and his missing millions. Television news segments featured interviews with Harold's neighbors and business associates, all expressing bewilderment at his disappearance. Margaret Donnelly from the bank appeared on several programs, describing Harold as a cautious, methodical man who would never have engaged in reckless financial behavior. The media coverage generated hundreds of tips from across the Southeast. Callers reported sightings of Harold in Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Each lead required investigation, stretching the task force's resources thin. Agent Morrison's team pursued reports of middle-aged men matching Harold's description who had purchased property, opened bank accounts, or started businesses in distant locations. However, none of these sightings proved legitimate. Detective Walsh focused his efforts on the local investigation, convinced that answers lay somewhere within Cullman County. He spent countless hours walking Harold's property, searching for evidence that might have been overlooked during initial sweeps. Walsh examined every building, every piece of equipment, and every corner of the 800-acre farm. He interviewed Harold's neighbors repeatedly, hoping someone might remember a crucial detail. The farm itself became a focal point of intense scrutiny. Federal agents brought in specialized equipment to conduct underground searches, theorizing that Harold might have buried the money or evidence related to his disappearance. Ground-penetrating radar revealed several anomalies beneath the soil, but extensive excavation produced only old farming equipment and natural rock formations. The barn, farmhouse, and outbuildings were searched methodically, with agents examining walls, floors, and ceilings for hidden compartments or concealed safes. As autumn arrived, the investigation faced mounting pressure from federal supervisors to produce results or redirect resources to more promising cases. Agent Morrison requested additional time, arguing that the substantial sum involved warranted continued attention. Her superiors agreed to maintain a reduced team through the end of 1983, but made clear that without significant developments, the case would be downgraded to inactive status. Harold's disappearance had profound effects on the local community. Cullman County First National faced intense scrutiny from banking regulators, who questioned the institution's procedures for large withdrawals. Margaret Donnelly implemented new policies requiring additional documentation and waiting periods for substantial transactions. The bank's reputation suffered, and several longtime customers transferred their accounts to competing institutions. Local farmers grew increasingly suspicious of outsiders and strangers. The agricultural community, traditionally welcoming to visitors, became guarded and protective. Neighbors installed security systems and began coordinating informal watch networks. The fear that Harold's fate might befall others created an atmosphere of tension that persisted for years. By December 1983, Agent Morrison's team had exhausted virtually every investigative avenue. They had interviewed over 200 people, examined thousands of documents, and pursued leads across 15 states. The financial trail remained completely cold. No bank, investment firm, or financial institution had any record of Harold or the missing funds. The cashier's checks and bearer bonds had never been presented for payment or conversion. In January 1984, the FBI officially classified the case as inactive, though it remained technically open. Agent Morrison was reassigned to other duties, and Detective Walsh was forced to focus on current crimes rather than the cold case. The investigation files were archived, and the intense daily attention that had characterized the case gradually faded. Years passed with occasional developments that briefly rekindled interest. In 1987, construction workers renovating a bank in Mobile discovered a safe deposit box that had been rented under a false name shortly after Harold's disappearance. The box contained only blank papers and outdated financial documents unrelated to the case. In 1992, a man resembling Harold was reportedly seen at a livestock auction in Mississippi, but investigation revealed him to be a local rancher with no connection to Alabama. The Harold Pemberton case became local legend, discussed in coffee shops and barber shops throughout Cullman County. Theories multiplied over the years. Some believed Harold had been murdered for his money and buried somewhere on his property. Others thought he had staged his own disappearance to escape unknown troubles. A few maintained that Harold had been recruited by federal agents for some classified operation and relocated with a new identity. Harold's farm remained in legal limbo for several years. With no will discovered and no known relatives coming forward, the property eventually became subject to state proceedings. In 1988, the land was sold at public auction to satisfy unpaid taxes and legal fees. The new owners, a young farming family from neighboring Marshall County, purchased the property at a significantly reduced price due to its notorious reputation. The decades that followed saw the farm change hands twice more. Each new owner dealt with the persistent curiosity of treasure hunters and amateur investigators who believed Harold's money remained hidden somewhere on the property. Metal detector enthusiasts regularly trespassed on the land, hoping to discover buried cash or clues. Several property owners installed fencing and posted no trespassing signs to discourage these activities. By 2020, the Harold Pemberton case had faded from active discussion except among longtime residents who remembered the original events. The farm was owned by Robert and Sarah Mitchell, a retired couple who had purchased the property in 2015 for its peaceful rural setting. The Mitchells were aware of the property's history but considered it ancient news with no bearing on their quiet retirement lifestyle. That summer, the Mitchells decided to renovate their main barn, which had suffered damage during recent storms. They hired Thompson Construction, a local contractor known for quality restoration work on historic agricultural buildings. The project required extensive structural repairs, including replacement of damaged support beams and reinforcement of the foundation. On August 15, 2020, Thompson construction crew members were removing rotted floorboards in the barn's southeast corner when their crowbars struck something metallic beneath the wooden planks. What they discovered would finally provide answers that had eluded investigators for 37 years. Buried 18 inches below the barn floor, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and canvas, lay Harold Pemberton's remains alongside the leather briefcase and canvas bank bag he had carried from the bank that March morning in 1983. The $6.2 million was still there, remarkably preserved despite the decades underground. The cashier's checks had deteriorated but remained partially legible, while the bearer bonds were found in near-perfect condition. More importantly, investigators discovered Harold's handwritten journal documenting the final weeks of his life. The entries revealed that Harold had been receiving death threats from individuals demanding payment for supposed gambling debts he had never incurred. Terrified and unable to distinguish legitimate threats from extortion attempts, Harold had withdrawn his life savings intending to disappear until the situation resolved. His final journal entry, dated March 14th, described his plan to hide the money and fake his own death until he could safely resurface. Harold had constructed the hiding place weeks earlier, but something had gone.